Impulse of an uncontrollable fear, Article 12, Paragraph 6 of the Revised Penal Code. Paragraph 6. Any person who acts under the impulse of an uncontrollable fear of an equal or greater injury. This exempting circumstance also presupposes that a person is compelled to commit a crime by another, but the compulsion is by means of intimidation or threat, not force or violence. Elements. 1. That the threat which causes the fear is of an evil greater than or at least equal to that which he is required to commit. 2. That it promises an evil of such gravity and imminence that the ordinary man would have succumbed to it. U.S. v. Elicanal. For the exempting circumstance of uncontrollable fear to be invoked successfully, the following requisites must concur. A. Existence of an uncontrollable fear. B. The fear must be real and imminent, and c. The fear of an injury is greater than or at least equal to that committed. People v. Petania. Illustration. Liberato Exaltation and Buenaventura Tanchinko were compelled under fear of death to swear allegiance to the Katipunan, whose purpose was to overthrow the government by force of arms. In this case, the accused cannot be held criminally liable for rebellion, because they joined the rebels under the impulse of an uncontrollable fear of an equal or greater injury. U.S. v. Exaltation. The penalty for rebellion, the crime which exaltation was required to commit, is prison mayor, that is, imprisonment for a period of from 6 years and 1 day to 12 years, and fine. The act which he was asked to commit was to swear allegiance to the Katipunan and become one of those engaged in overthrowing the government by force of arms. If he did not commit it, he would be killed. Death is a much greater injury than imprisonment for 12 years and paying a fine. But if A had threatened to burn the house of B, should the latter not kill his, B's, father, and B killed his father for fear that A might burn his, B's, house. B is not exempt from criminal liability for the reason that the evil with which he was threatened was much less than that of killing his father. Nature of duress as a valid defense. Duress as a valid defense should be based on real, imminent, or reasonable fear for one's life or limb and should not be speculative, fanciful, or remote fear. People v. Borja, citing People v. Quilloy. The accused must not have opportunity for escape or self-defense. A threat of future injury is not enough. The compulsion must be of such a character as to leave no opportunity to the accused for escape or self-defense in equal combat. Duress is unavailing where the accused had every opportunity to run away if he had wanted to or to resist any possible aggression because he was also armed. People v. Palencia, People v. Abanes. Where the accused, who testified that he was intimidated into committing the crime, had several opportunities of leaving the gang which had decided to kidnap the victim. His theory that he acted under intimidation is untenable. People v. Perulan, 88 ph. Where the accused testified that he joined the band because he was threatened by the leader thereof, but it appears that the leader was armed with a revolver only, while the accused was armed with a rifle, so that he could have resisted said leader. It was held that the accused did not act under the impulse of an uncontrollable fear of an equal or greater injury. People v. Vargas and Comatoy. As regards accused Domingo Galfio, the evidence is clear that it was he who first struck Ariza with the butt of his gun, hitting him on the side of his body, then gave him a fist blow on his stomach, and after he had been taken to a secluded place. It was he who ordered Ariza to lie down in the fashion adopted by the Kempeitai during gloomy days of Japanese occupation, and in that position gave him a blow on the back of his neck which almost severed his head from the body. His participation in the killing of Ariza cannot therefore be doubted. His only defense is that he did so in obedience to the order of his commander, and because he acted under the influence of uncontrollable fear, he should be exempt from criminal responsibility. This defense of Golfio is clearly untenable not only because of the well-settled rule that obedience to an order of a superior will only justify an act which otherwise would be criminal when the order is for a lawful purpose, but also because the circumstances under which Golfio participated in the torture and liquidation of Ariza cannot in any way justify his claim that he acted under an uncontrollable fear of being punished by his superiors if he disobeyed their order. In the first place, at the time of the killing, Golfio was armed with an automatic carbine such that he could have protected himself from any retaliation on the part of his superiors if they should threaten to punish him if he disobeyed their order to kill Ariza. In the second place, the evidence shows that Ariza was brought to a secluded place quite far from that where his superiors were at the time, and in such a predicament, he and his companion Arsenal could have escaped with Ariza to avoid the ire of their superiors. The fact that he carried out their order although his superiors were at some distance from him, and that without pity and compunction he struck his victim in a Kempati fashion, shows that he acted on the matter not involuntarily or under the pressure of fear or force, as he claims, but out of his own free will and with the desire to collaborate with the criminal design of his superiors. People vs. Ragadu, et.al. Command of Hukbala Hop Killers, as cause of uncontrollable fear. Timoteo Montemayor was accused of murder for having told his two companions to fetch shovels and to dig a grave, and for having walked behind the Hukbala Hop Killers to the place of the execution of the victim. It appears that the two Hukbala Haps were ruthless killers and were then in a mood to inflict extreme and summary punishment for disobedience to the command. The place was isolated, escape was at least risky, and protection by lawfully constituted authorities was out of reach. The accused was acquitted, for having acted under the impulse of uncontrollable fear of an equal or greater injury. People vs. Regala, et al. In treason. In the eyes of the law, nothing will excuse that act of joining an enemy, but the fear of immediate death. People vs. Bugalawies, citing the case of Republica vs. M. Carty. This ruling is similar to that in the exaltation case. Speculative, fanciful, and remote fear is not uncontrollable fear. The defendant ordered the deceased, whose both hands were tied at the back, to kneel down with the head bent forward by the side of the grave already prepared for him by order of said defendant. Then, defendant hacked the head of the deceased with a Japanese saber and immediately kicked the prostrate body of the victim into the grave. When prosecuted for murder, the defendant claimed that he had been ordered by Major Sasaki to kill the deceased. He also claimed that he could not refuse to comply with that order, because the Japanese officer made a threat. Held. If the only evidence relating to a sort of a threat is the testimony of the defendant, as they insisted and I informed them that I could not do it, then Captain Suzuki told me, "Tio, you have to comply with that order of Major Sasaki. Otherwise, you have to come along with us." That threat is not of such a serious character and imminence as to create in the mind of the defendant an uncontrollable fear that an equal or greater evil or injury would be inflicted upon him if he did not comply with the alleged order to kill the deceased. People vs. Moreno. Mere fear of a member of the Hook movement to disobey or refuse to carry out orders of the organization, in the absence of proof of actual physical or moral compulsion to act, is not sufficient to exempt the accused from criminal liability. People vs. Fernando. Real, imminent, or reasonable fear. The case of U.S. vs. exaltation is the example. There is here fear of immediate death. A threat of future injury is not enough. To appreciate duress as a valid defense, a threat of future injury is not enough. It must be clearly shown that the compulsion must be of such character as to leave no opportunity for the accused to escape. People vs. Palencia, People vs. Abanes. Distinction between irresistible force and uncontrollable fear. In irresistible force, paragraph 5, the offender uses violence or physical force to compel another person to commit a crime. In uncontrollable fear, paragraph 6, the offender